Johnny Depp was never just a movie star. He was a feeling. From the porcelain melancholy of Edward Scissorhands to the swagger-drunk sorcery of Jack Sparrow, he turned misfits into mirrors and made the strange feel sacred. But the same light that crowned him also exposed the fractures beneath. A boy from Kentucky who learned early that love can be loud and leaving is louder. A man who mistook momentum for peace until everything stopped, careers paused, friendships tested, romances shattered in public glare. This is not a tabloid autopsy or a fan letter. It's a map of the fault lines, the childhood that gnawed at him, the music that saved him, the fame that caged him, the roles that remade him, the love that steadied him, the storm that scandalized him, and the long crawl back to quiet. Stay with me as we walk that ridge, where applause fades, truth hurts, and survival looks less like triumph and more like learning how to breathe again. If his art ever reached you, consider this your invitation to look past the myth and meet the man. Before Hollywood, before the costumes, before the characters that defined a generation, there was simply John Christopher Depp II, a boy born into a storm he could never control. He entered the world on June 9, 1963, in Owensboro, Kentucky, the youngest of 4 children to John and Betty Sue Depp. From the outside, it looked like a modest, working-class American family. But inside the walls of their homes, wherever those homes happened to be, instability reigned. The Depps were always in motion, uprooting themselves more than 20 times during Johnny's childhood. Just as he would begin to find comfort in one neighborhood, his family would pack up and vanish to another. For most children, moving means the excitement of new friends and fresh starts. For Johnny, it meant fractured connections, constant goodbyes, and the painful lesson that nothing could ever last. The turbulence wasn't just geographical. His parents' marriage was volatile, often clouded with tension and sharp words that left the air heavy with unease. The foundation every child needs, security, trust, a sense of belonging, was never firmly beneath him. By the time the family finally settled in Miramar, Florida, Johnny had already absorbed more emotional upheaval than most adults could bear. But the most devastating blow came when he was only 15. His parents divorced, an event he would later call volcanic, a rupture that cracked open the fragile ground beneath his feet. After the divorce, Betty Sue remarried Robert Palmer, a man who, unlike Johnny's father, provided quiet stability and encouragement. But the scars were already carved deep into Johnny's spirit. He described his teenage years as filled with rage, confusion, and solitude. While other boys his age were planning dances, ball games, or parties, Johnny withdrew. The house was no longer a home, and his heart no longer felt safe. He retreated into himself, often hiding in his room, searching for a way to quiet the storms within. When he was 12, Betty Sue had handed him a guitar. She couldn't have known then that this single act would shape her son's entire existence. That guitar became far more than wood and strings. It became his lifeline, his sanctuary. Every note he played was a confession he couldn't put into words. Every melody a way to soften the ache he couldn't share with anyone else. Late nights in dimly lit rooms, cluttered garages, and with friends in small local bands, Johnny found his voice in music. He wasn't the loudest or the most polished, but there was a rawness, a fragility in his playing that mirrored his inner battles. Music was rebellion, therapy, and salvation rolled into one. School, on the other hand, felt suffocating. The rigid rules and expectations clashed with his restless spirit. By 16, he dropped out, unable to reconcile his broken home life with the structure of high school. Though he briefly attempted to return, his principal told him bluntly, perhaps prophetically, that he would never be fulfilled by traditional education. Instead, the principal urged him to chase what gave him purpose: music. That conversation validated what Johnny already knew deep down, that he was not made for conformity. He was meant to wander, to search, to bleed through art. But even as he carved out fleeting moments of escape through music, the ghosts of his childhood never loosened their grip. Every chord carried the echo of slammed doors. Every small applause at a local gig was followed by the deafening silence of unresolved pain. His youth was not simply difficult, it was merciless. And yet, it shaped him in ways the world would later marvel at. From that crucible of loss, loneliness, and instability, emerged a young man who would one day channel those wounds into unforgettable characters. Before Johnny Depp was ever a Hollywood star, he was just a boy with a guitar, strumming through grief, searching for light in the shadows, and trying desperately to prove to himself that he mattered. By the early 1980s, Johnny Depp's entire being was wired for one thing: music. Acting was nowhere in sight, not even a faint idea. He and his band, the Kids, were convinced they were destined for something greater. With guitars strapped to their backs and ambition burning hotter than hunger, they packed their lives into vans and left Florida for Los Angeles, chasing the same dream as thousands before them: to conquer rock and roll. At first, the move felt electric. The city pulsed with possibility, but it didn't take long for reality to carve its scars. Instead of stadiums, there were dive bars. Instead of record deals, there were endless nights of rejection. Johnny, barely in his 20s, worked odd jobs to keep himself afloat, selling pens over the phone, scraping together enough to pay rent, surviving one exhausted day at a time. The dream of stardom that had once been his lifeline began slipping through his fingers, and with it, his sense of who he was meant to be. Yet fate, as cruel as it had often been, intervened in a way no script could have written. Through his first wife, makeup artist Lori Ann Allison, Johnny was introduced to Nicolas Cage. Cage saw something in him, an intensity, a sadness in his eyes that hinted at stories not yet told. He urged Johnny to try acting, insisting he had the raw magnetism of someone who could hold a screen. Johnny resisted. He had never studied theater, never dreamed of being on screen. His heroes strummed guitars, not memorized scripts, but curiosity flickered. Maybe, he thought, there was another path out of obscurity. When he auditioned for Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, it felt accidental. Craven's daughter reportedly insisted he had the look, and so Johnny landed the role of Glenn, the doomed boyfriend devoured by Freddy Krueger. The part was small, but its impact was seismic. Watching himself die on screen was surreal, but more than that, it cracked something open inside him. For the first time, he realized acting could be what music had been: a language for pain, a stage for emotions too jagged to speak. He later admitted he never wanted to be an actor, but acting gave him something unexpected. It gave him a canvas. Each role became a survival tool, another chance to exorcise the ghosts that had followed him since childhood. Acting, like music, was rebellion. But where music was chords and rhythm, acting was silence, movement, and contradiction. He wasn't just performing, he was confessing. Friends and family watched in disbelief as the boy who once strummed alone in a Florida bedroom now appeared on screens across America. It was poetic irony. The misfit who had once begged for belonging found it by playing misfits no one else wanted. From the start, Johnny understood something about the craft that most actors overlooked. He wasn't there to be liked or adored. He was there to feel, to bleed honestly, to throw pieces of himself into every frame. What had started as a fluke role in a horror film became the pivot point of his destiny. He was no longer simply Johnny with a broken guitar dream. He was Johnny Depp, a man discovering that the screen itself could be his sanctuary. And though he couldn't yet see where it would lead, he sensed a shift. The boy who once ran from the wreckage of his family was about to step into a new storm, one brighter, louder, and far more dangerous than anything he had known before. What began as a fluke role in a horror film soon escalated into something Johnny Depp could never have predicted. By the late 1980s, he found himself cast as Officer Tom Hansen in the Fox television series 21 Jump Street. At only 24 years old, he was suddenly thrust into the blinding glare of fame. Overnight, he went from struggling musician to the face of teenage America. His picture was plastered on bedroom walls. his name shouted in shopping malls, his every move dissected by fans who saw in him not a complex artist, but a heartthrob built for their adoration. To the outside world, it looked like the dream had come true. Steady paychecks, constant visibility, and the kind of fame most actors chased their entire careers. But for Johnny, it was suffocating. He confessed in later interviews that he felt more like a product than a person, a commodity packaged and sold by executives who didn't care about his art, only his marketability. The role gave him financial stability, but it stripped away something far more precious, his sense of authenticity. He hated the feeling of being branded, of being forced into a mold that erased the pain, the rebellion, and the contradictions that defined him. Behind the glossy magazine covers, he was quietly at war. Fame did not heal him, it caged him. The more the world screamed for Officer Hansen, the more Depp longed to disappear. He began to resent the very machine that had elevated him, describing 21 Jump Street as a necessary evil, a stepping stone he endured rather than embraced. It wasn't art to him, it was survival. And yet, within that frustration, something ignited. He made a decision that would define the rest of his career. He would not be owned by Hollywood's image factories. He would not be the teen idol they tried to chain him to. Instead, he would rebel, not recklessly, but deliberately, through the roles he chose. While executives dangled lucrative opportunities for conventional leading man parts, Johnny turned them down, one after another, in favor of characters who were darker, stranger, and more complicated. He gravitated toward roles that reflected the turmoil inside him, characters that mirrored the sense of being misunderstood and displaced. This wasn't career sabotage, as some warned him. It was a declaration, a refusal to bow to convention. He wanted to be more than seen. He wanted to be understood. That choice confused many in Hollywood, but endeared him to those who craved authenticity in a sea of polished faces. Out of the suffocating box of teen idol fame, Johnny Depp began carving one of the most unconventional careers the industry had ever seen. He didn't just play outsiders, he became one. And in doing so, he set himself on a path that would redefine what it meant to be a movie star. Not a product, not a poster, but an artist. Flawed and defiant, carrying his wounds like a torch and daring the world to look deeper. The 1990s became the decade where Johnny Depp shed the last remnants of the teen idol mask and fully embraced the role of Hollywood's most unpredictable outsider. He was not interested in the safe, lucrative scripts that most young stars clung to in fear of fading too soon. Instead, he sought out the strange, the broken, and the misunderstood, characters who mirrored his own inner storms. At 27, he appeared in John Waters' Cry Baby, 1990, a campy satire that mocked the very image the world had forced upon him. By playing a parody of a heartthrob, Depp declared war on the industry's attempt to reduce him to a poster on a wall. But it was later that same year when everything changed. Teaming up with director Tim Burton, Depp transformed into Edward Scissorhands, a gentle, tragic figure whose silence spoke volumes. With his scarred face, awkward movements, and blades for hands, Edward was more than a fantasy character. He was Depp himself, a boy from a broken home, scarred by instability, longing for acceptance, yet condemned to isolation. Audiences didn't just watch Edward, they felt him, and in turn, they felt Johnny. For the first time, he was no longer dismissed as a teen idol. He was recognized as an artist. That collaboration with Burton would anchor his career for decades, giving him the freedom to dive deeper into the world of misfits and outsiders. He followed Edward with a string of daring roles: the whimsical eccentric in Benny and June, 1993, the dreamlike wanderer in Arizona Dream, 1993, and the poetic gunslinger in Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man, 1995. Each choice was stranger, braver, and more vulnerable than the last, pulling him further away from convention and closer to the authenticity he craved. Perhaps his boldest move came in Ed Wood, 1994, where he portrayed the infamously inept cult filmmaker. What could have been a mockery, Depp infused with tenderness and sincerity, turning the character into a tribute to dreamers who refused to give up despite ridicule. By 1998, he was Hunter S. Thompson's alter ego in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, disappearing so completely into chaos and psychedelia that audiences questioned whether he was acting at all or simply exercising something raw and unfiltered from within. Through all of these roles, one theme tied them together. Every character was an outsider, someone rejected by society, someone misunderstood. And in playing them, Johnny wasn't just performing. He was reclaiming his identity. He was declaring that vulnerability could be strength, that strangeness could be heroic, that brokenness could be beautiful. By the end of the decade, Johnny Depp was no longer a teen idol or even just a star. He had become a symbol of defiance, individuality, and uncompromising artistic courage. He didn't need to shout or conform to Hollywood's rules. He let the misfits speak for him, and in doing so, he turned them into legends. By the early 2000s, Johnny Depp had earned a reputation as Hollywood's great eccentric, a man who chose art over stardom, who disappeared into characters so strange and fragile that he became a symbol of rebellion against the system. But in 2003, at the age of 40, he did something no one expected. He turned a Disney summer blockbuster into a cultural earthquake. Cast as Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, Depp created a character unlike any Disney hero audiences had ever seen. With his staggering walk, slurred words, and mischievous grin, Jack Sparrow was part rock star, part trickster, and part ghost of every rebel Depp had ever admired. The performance terrified executives. When studio heads saw the first footage, they panicked, whispering that Depp was drunk, that he was mocking the role, that he was about to sink a $100 million film. But Depp refused to back down. He defended Sparrow as his creation, explaining that the pirate was inspired by Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, a man who embodied the swagger of rebellion. It was a gamble so risky, it nearly cost him the role. Yet, when the film finally hit theaters, the gamble paid off beyond anyone's imagination. Audiences were hypnotized, critics disarmed, and Disney suddenly found itself with a phenomenon it had never foreseen. The film dominated the box office, turned pirates into pop culture icons, and earned Depp his first Academy Award nomination. The misfit who once mocked stardom had become one of the biggest stars in the world. Sequels followed, bigger, louder, and richer. With each installment, Depp became one of the highest-paid actors on the planet, commanding salaries that climbed into tens of millions, transforming him into a modern king of Hollywood. To outsiders, he appeared untouchable, but behind the gold teeth and flamboyant swagger, shadows crept in. The role that elevated him to legend began to feel like a gilded cage. Returning to Jack Sparrow again and again dulled the instincts that had once driven him toward unpredictable art. What began as playful transformation soured into formula, and Depp admitted that the thrill of becoming someone new was slowly being replaced by the burden of keeping Sparrow's flame alive. Endless filming schedules, exhausting global press tours, and the pressure of living up to audience expectations drained him. The character who had made him immortal also began to imprison him, and as his private life unraveled, with his long relationship with Vanessa Paradis collapsing, Depp's world turned into tabloid spectacle. The line between Jack Sparrow and Johnny Depp blurred, until even he felt lost inside the performance. Later, he would confess that those years, though gilded with wealth and applause, were marked by loneliness so deep it gnawed at his soul. Yet even in exhaustion, his devotion to art never faded. He poured unpredictable humor, aching vulnerability, and quiet rebellion into Sparrow, transforming what could have been a cartoon into a tortured, magnetic anti-hero. Where most actors performed, Depp created. He breathed a legend into existence, one that carried fragments of his own fire, fragility, and defiance. With Jack Sparrow, he didn't just reinvent the pirate genre, he redefined what it meant to be a movie star. But at the very peak of his fame, when the world roared in approval, Johnny Depp felt the most unseen. Behind the costumes, the roles, and the fame, Johnny Depp's life was shaped just as much by the chaos of his romantic relationships as it was by his career. His story of love is not one of gentle companionship, but of passion, heartbreak, and wounds that cut so deep they spilled into every corner of his existence. His first marriage came in 1983 when he was only 20 years old. Still struggling as a musician, Depp married makeup artist Laurie Ann Allison, who was 6 years older and, in many ways, steadier than him. She provided the stability he had craved since childhood, introducing him to actor Nicolas Cage and indirectly guiding him to the path of acting. Their marriage lasted only 2 years, ending in 1985, but it carried a quiet significance. She was the doorway into Hollywood. While the romance failed, the impact was permanent. It showed Depp that love could inspire transformation, even if it couldn't always last. After a string of high-profile relationships, including engagements to Sherilyn Fenn, Jennifer Grey, and Winona Ryder, whose name he famously tattooed on his body with the iconic Winona Forever, he would enter what became the longest and most meaningful chapter of his romantic life. In 1998, while filming The Ninth Gate in France, he met French singer and actress Vanessa Paradis. What began as a spark quickly grew into a refuge from Hollywood's chaos. With Vanessa, Depp found not just a partner, but peace, a sense of grounding he had never truly known. Their life together stretched for 14 years, producing 2 children, Lily Rose in 1999 and Jack in 2002. Fatherhood transformed him completely. He admitted that becoming a father gave him a foundation, a real strong place to stand in life, in work, in everything. For years, he appeared to have found what he had always been searching for: a family, a sanctuary, and a love strong enough to quiet the storms. But even strong foundations can crack. In 2012, the relationship ended quietly, with little scandal, but the emotional fallout was devastating. Depp confessed openly that the breakup was painful not only for him, but for their children, who had been his anchor. Vanessa had been his compass, his stability, and without her, he felt adrift once more. Those close to him recalled how he withdrew, becoming more reclusive, his artistic fire dimmed by heartbreak. It was the end of the last truly steady chapter of his personal life, and it left him vulnerable to the storms waiting just ahead. In 2009, during the filming of The Rum Diary, Depp met actress Amber Heard. Their chemistry on set spilled into real life, and by 2015, at the age of 51, Depp married her. What began as whirlwind passion quickly spiraled into one of the most infamous and destructive unions in Hollywood history. Within just 15 months, the marriage collapsed under allegations, denials, and a storm of accusations that ignited an international spectacle. Heard accused him of abuse, linking her claims to substance use, while Depp denied everything, claiming manipulation and deceit. Tabloids feasted on every detail, and for the first time in decades, Depp's image was not one of beloved eccentric, but of scandal and suspicion. The divorce in 2016 ended with a $7 million settlement, which Heard pledged to charity. But the damage to Depp's reputation was catastrophic. And worse, it was only the beginning of years of courtroom battles, relentless scrutiny, and the slow public crucifixion of a man once adored worldwide. What love had once given him, stability, refuge, even redemption, was now replaced with chaos, betrayal, and destruction. Every relationship seemed to leave deeper scars than the last, and by the time his marriage to Amber Heard imploded, Johnny Depp was no longer the romantic outsider searching for peace. He was a man bleeding publicly, every heartbreak played out under the unblinking gaze of the world. At the height of his career, Johnny Depp lived as though he were not just an actor, but a king ruling over an empire of extravagance. With films like Pirates of the Caribbean and Alice in Wonderland earning him some of the largest paychecks in Hollywood history, $55 million for one, $60 million for another, he amassed a fortune once estimated at $650 million. But instead of securing his future, he built a kingdom too large, too lavish, and too fragile to sustain. His life became a patchwork of indulgence, a 37-acre French village lovingly restored with Vanessa Paradis, 5 penthouses in Los Angeles' Eastern Columbia building, a sprawling Kentucky horse farm, a Hollywood Hills mansion, and even a private island chain in the Bahamas, where he could escape the noise of the world. Each home was less a residence and more a fantasy, a refuge that reflected not just wealth, but his restless spirit and constant search for belonging. Among his most personal treasures was a 156-foot luxury yacht named Vajolaroja, an amalgam of the names Vanessa, Johnny, Lily Rose, and Jack. It was a floating palace that carried not just grandeur, but the memory of a love he once believed eternal. His garage mirrored his hunger for rebellion, stocked with a collection of muscle cars, Ferraris, Porsches, and even a Rolls-Royce Wraith. He rented private jets at nearly $200,000 a month, bought fine wine at $30,000 monthly, and paid $150,000 for round-the-clock security alongside $300,000 in salaries for a staff of more than 40. To the outside world, it looked like the reign of a modern-day monarch. Yet, beneath the gold, the truth was darker. The empire was less about joy and more about grief. Every indulgence was a shield against the emptiness he carried. Every purchase a distraction from the chaos within. But grief cannot be silenced by extravagance. By his early 50s, the empire began to crack. In 2017, Depp sued his former management company, the Management Group, TMG, claiming they had mismanaged his fortune. The lawsuit backfired, opening the vault of his finances to public scrutiny. Headlines screamed about spending that bordered on the unbelievable $3 million to fire the ashes of his friend Hunter S. Thompson out of a cannon, $75 million sunk into properties around the globe, $18 million on a luxury yacht, millions more on rare art, guitars, and collectibles. These revelations shocked the world, not just for their excess, but for what they revealed about a man spiraling out of control. Properties once symbols of triumph became burdens he could no longer sustain. One by one, he sold them off. The French village, the penthouses, and finally even the yacht that bore his family's names, which passed into the hands of J.K. Rowling. Each sale was more than financial necessity. It was symbolic, like pieces of his past being stripped away, leaving him increasingly exposed. Friends noted how the fire in him seemed dimmed, his rebellious spark replaced by exhaustion and humiliation. What began as a battle over money had morphed into something larger, a crisis of identity. For decades, Depp had seemed untouchable, his name synonymous with wealth, power, and artistic defiance. But now, the world saw something different. They saw a fallen king, his empire collapsing under the weight of lawsuits, betrayal, and recklessness. By his mid-50s, the illusion of invincibility was gone. He was no longer the sovereign of an empire, but a man surrounded by ruins, searching desperately for something real to hold on to. In the ashes of his fortune lay the sobering truth. Fame and money had never been enough to heal him, and now even those were slipping away. By the time Johnny Depp reached his 60s, the man the world saw was no longer the hollow-eyed figure paraded across tabloids, no longer the untouchable idol of the early 2000s. He emerged instead as something far more powerful, a survivor who had endured the kind of storms that might have destroyed anyone else. After years of lawsuits, financial collapse, heartbreak, and the brutal public trial that dragged every corner of his private life into the open, Depp seemed to step back, not to reclaim the throne he once held, but to finally breathe as himself. His appearance in 2023 stunned longtime admirers. Silver streaks now ran through his hair, a weathered beard framed the same piercing blue eyes, and his style carried the quiet dignity of a man who no longer chased applause. Fans called it a glow-up, but for Johnny, it wasn't vanity, it was survival, proof that even after fire, something resilient can rise from the ashes. He admitted in interviews, "I don't think about Hollywood anymore," a sentence that cut through decades of spectacle. The machine that once crowned him and nearly destroyed him no longer held power over his spirit. He now chose projects deliberately, films like Jean Dubarry and music collaborations with Alice Cooper and Joe Perry through Hollywood vampires, because they carried meaning, not because they promised box office dominance. At home, he retreated to the French countryside, preferring quiet stone walls and vineyards to flashing lights, surrounding himself with trusted friends, art, and music. His children, Lily Rose and Jack, remained his deepest anchors, reminders of what mattered when everything else collapsed. Financially, his empire had shrunk, but he had traded excess for intention, extravagance for peace. He lived no longer as a king, but as a man finally content to walk unseen. In the end, Johnny Depp's greatest role was not Edward Scissorhands, Jack Sparrow, or any character Hollywood celebrated. It was himself, the wounded boy from Kentucky, who endured chaos, loss, betrayal, and humiliation, and somehow kept walking forward. His survival was not just a comeback. It was a victory carved from scars, a reminder that peace, not applause, is the truest measure of a life.